So we talked a lot about yesterday about Pitt missing out on defensive tackle transfer Anthony Johnson, formerly of Jeanette, then Bowling Green, then Youngstown State, then Illinois. Illinois just for the past few months, and then he went back into the transfer portal in April, committed to Mississippi State 2 days ago, whatever day that was. We talked about it yesterday on the Morning Pitt. And naturally, since Johnson was one of the defensive line targets that had emerged, when he came off the board, it was a big conversation topic on the message boards at Panther-Lair.com. Pitt fans are going to talk about Pitt stuff, and the place they're going to do it is on the message boards at Panther-Lair.com. If you're a Pitt fan, you're not on the message boards, you've been missing out on some of the best Pitt conversation and Pitt fan community that there is on the internet. And so when something like that happens, when a target comes off the board and goes to another school, particularly one at a priority position like the defensive line, although I would contend the defensive tackle is less of a priority than defensive end, but nevertheless, there's going to be a lot of conversation about it, and naturally it's going to be rather spirited. And that's certainly been the case. There's a extended thread about Anthony Johnson, as his decision was looming, with it coming down to Pitt and Mississippi State, and then ultimately his decision to commit to Mississippi State. There's a pretty decent-sized thread about that on the boards. And tucked into that, and a lot of times this happens when a recruiting target or transfer target goes to another school, it becomes a discussion of the much bigger picture about where Pitt is in the world of college football and NIL and Pat Narduzzi and whether it's all worth it or not. And to be honest, the vibes aren't too good. And the vibes aren't great around throughout the fan base as far as the football program goes right now. And some of that's to be expected when you're coming off a 3-9 season. That can take a lot out of you, for sure. But I was thinking about the team this year and kind of what the general perception is and the questions that I think a lot of people have, and to be honest, the questions that I have. So I thought, what better to do than, sit here on May 9th and talk about the biggest questions facing Pitt this season. And I think it's a lot of things that we're all already asking, but let's put them down. These are the 5 biggest questions I have. And then I'd like to hear from you if you think I missed something obvious, or if you think one of these is not as big of a question mark as I'm making it out to be. So that's what we're going to do here on Thursday. We're going to get the biggest tomorrow you'll be asking the questions in the mailbag. But for today, I'll be asking the questions on the Morning Pitt here on youtube.com/Panther-Lair.com. Yeah, we'll take your questions tomorrow in the mailbag edition of the Morning Pitt on youtube.com/Panther-Lair.com. Today, we're going to have my questions about Pitt football on the Morning Pitt on youtube.com/Panther-Lair.com. Remember, if you want to make sure you don't miss any of our Pitt video content, like this video and subscribe. Subscribe button's right down there. You can subscribe to our YouTube channel, and then you will be connected for everything that we do. You won't miss any of it, and we certainly wouldn't want you to miss anything. These daily Morning Pitt videos, our weekly live stream like we did last night at 8:30 p.m. with Jim Hammett, and anything else that might pop up on here, interviews, press conferences, that kind of thing. Like and subscribe. We'd appreciate it. Biggest questions for Pitt football this season. And there's no particular reason that we're talking about this on May 9th. It's just a topic, and it's probably a summation of topics we've been talking about up until this point, and a summation of topics that we will continue talking about over the course of the next couple months leading into training camp. I just texted Jim, Jim Hammett from our site. I just texted him yesterday about starting to plan out some summer preview content. What we're going to do for 8 or 10 weeks leading up to training camp. Obviously, recruiting will be a big part of it, and that's certainly the case in June with the official visits and all the commitments that they always get. But we're going to start breaking down the team. And so training camp is not right around the corner, but it's not that far away. We're already into May. It'll start in August. So, whatever that is, 3 months. Feels longer when I say 3 months. But when I started looking week by week, it's a lot closer than you think. So some of the biggest questions, and I think, I'm going to say this is the number one biggest question, but I'm going to say this about 4 times. I think the number one biggest question has to be, will the new offense work? There's something to be said, and I think it's to Pat Narduzzi's credit, and I think he only gets this credit in passing from the fan base. I don't think the fan base fully commits to giving him credit for this, but there's something to be said for Pat Narduzzi doing a complete 180 on the offense he has run and preferred to run, and what he has wanted to do on offense for the last decade. to turn around and do what they're going to do this year, to turn around and hire the kind of coordinator that he hired in Cade Bell, who's going to do something that's so far away and so different from what they have done for the last 10 years, that I think you can't help but give Narduzzi credit for making that change. There's a certain awareness, a certain self-awareness. There's a certain willingness, I think, to pivot. And that's what he's done, is he's pivoted very significantly away from what they were with Frank Cignetti and what they were really over the years prior to that, whether it was, Mark Whipple, which might have been a little bit closer, but, Sean Watson, which might have been further away. And then Matt Canada, who was its own thing, and Jim Chaney, which wasn't really like this. It's very different. It's very different from what they've done. And I think there's you start right there by saying, hey, shout out to Narduzzi for trying something different, for saying, wow, this isn't working. Offense cost us big time last year. We went 3-9, and now we're going to have to do something completely different. And they are. They're doing something completely different. So you give some credit there. I do, at least. You can do whatever you want. But it comes with a certain risk. You hire a guy who is not coached at this level before, there's a certain risk inherent in that hire. When you hire a guy who's had a lot of success at the FCS level, I think there's something to be said for the notion that scheme can translate, that scheme can travel, that a good scheme can move from level to level, particularly if your talent level goes up when you move from one level to the next. But at the same time, we need to see it work. We have not seen this offense work at this level, and until we do, we don't really know if it's going to. And so that's the biggest question. Of course, there's a lot of little questions within that, but the biggest question is, will the offense work? Because if the offense doesn't work, it's going to look a lot like last year. Maybe not quite as bad as last year, because I'm sort of the mind that last year was an absolute rock bottom. I mean, like, they were bad last year, largely at the quarterback position, but devastatingly bad, and they still managed to eke out 3 wins. I think even if the offense doesn't really work this year, it still should be like a 6-win team, or maybe worst case scenario 5-7 or something like that. I mean, not that either one of those is a record you should be shooting for or anything that would be celebrated, but I don't think it would bottom out as far as 3-9. But I digress. Is the offense going to work? Now, of course, there's some questions inherent in that. That sort of brings us to question number 2. How will the play at quarterback be? And I think we're all hypersensitive to the question about quarterback play, largely because, if you think about what observing Pitt football has been, you had Kenny Pickett as the starting quarterback for 4 years. And you get that long, it just sort of... You go a long time without wondering about the starting quarterback. You go a long time without worrying about who the starter is going to be, or if competition or any of those kinds of things. And so you go into 2022 looking for a new guy that's just going to be that guy, and you won't have to worry about it. And it was Keaton Slovis, and then all of a sudden he got hurt in the Tennessee game, and he was never the same after that. And it all, the story that fell out from there. And then you go into the last season again thinking you got that guy, don't have to worry about it, and it's Phil Dracovic, and he's bad. I mean, he's just terrible. Not like himself at all, seemingly. According to anybody who knows him, that it was a very stark departure from who he is and who he's ever been. But either way, now you've got all this upheaval. And so it feels like basically you had 4 years of Kenny Pickett instability, and then you have 2 years of instability and uncertainty. And I think that probably creates an even greater air of uncertainty around Nate Yarnell. Nate Yarnell is going to be the starting quarterback this season. I mean, I don't really see that changing. I guess Eli Holstein could make a push, but even there's uncertainty, and it's probably enhanced for Pitt fans who have felt the instability of the quarterback position over the last 2 years. I mean, I think Nate Yarnell has been nothing but solid every time he's gotten the opportunity, whether it was the Western Michigan game in 2022, when he came in at the end of the Notre Dame game last year, the end of the Syracuse game, or the Boston College game, even the Duke game. He was fine. He was solid. And we're sort of lowering the bar there. Not to say that that's his ceiling, but we're lowering the bar because just fine or solid play would have won like another 4 games last year or 5 games last year just by being solid and okay. And so you don't want to set the bar too low and say, well, all you have to do is just be okay, but it kind of feels that way. But it's a question mark of what is he going to do when he is the guy, when the game is put on his shoulders, particularly in a new kind of offense that's going to be very different from what he did last year. How's he going to do? How's he going to perform? And is he going to be good enough? And then there's like a sub question within that of if he's not good enough, how quick will he get the hook? Will Cade Bell and Panthers be quicker to change quarterbacks than Frank Cignetti and Panthers were last year? You would certainly hope that if Nate Yarnell has 5 games like Phil Dracovic had 5 games, or if Nate Yarnell performs in the first 5 games the way Phil Dracovic performed in the first 5 games, that Nate Yarnell would not get 5 games to perform that way. You would certainly hope that, I think a lot of us circle halftime of the West Virginia game and saying that would have been a good time to change quarterbacks. You would hope that if the situation after 2.5 games this year is like the situation after 2.5 games last year, that such a change would be made. That's sort of another sub-question within these questions about the quarterback position. But you just don't know. You don't know what Nate Yarnell is going to be. He's passed pretty much every test so far, but you don't know what he's actually going to be when he's facing the biggest test of being the number 1 quarterback. Another question within the offense is the wide receiver position. I'm not too concerned about the running back position. I think the tight ends will be fine if they actually throw them the ball. But the wide receivers, not very, what's the best adjective for this? I'm not trying to think of a funny adjective or something. I mean, they didn't exactly break out last year. I think Bub Means over the final 8 games was really good, pretty good. I think Konate Mumfield, I continue to be a big Konate Mumfield fan, but I don't know if we've seen his ceiling or not. I hope we haven't seen his ceiling, but I think the possibility exists. Kenny Johnson is all potential right now and very little actually proven. Dejon Reynolds, we probably saw who he is last year. The 2 transfers from Western Carolina, Raphael Williams and CJ Lee. Who knows? Yeah, I mean, total up in the air. Total, I don't want to say a total crapshoot because the real crapshoot is the redshirt freshman. I mean, Zion Fowler and Lamar Seymour, with Izzy Polk having transferred. Those guys are a crapshoot because we've seen virtually nothing of them. So it's just all question marks, and part of that's tied to the play at quarterback, and part of that's tied to the effectiveness at quarterback, or the effectiveness of the offense overall. But it's a big question mark, and you just don't know what you're going to get out of those guys. And some of it comes back to the offense. Well, we're going to scheme guys open, and this offense is designed to get guys open. And okay, maybe that helps. Maybe that helps offset if you have a lack of talent. Maybe that helps the situation. But at the same time, you need guys to make plays. And I think there's a very much a lack of proven playmakers on this offense at wide receiver. They have some decent running backs. I think they'll be fine at running back. Like I said, they'll be fine at tight end if they actually get the ball to the tight ends. But at wide receiver, it's unproven. Very much unproven. And there's not a lot of sort of blind faith that I think you can put on the wide receivers right now. Because it's not even like there's a great pedigree there. So big time question mark there. I think the offensive line is a bit of a question mark, maybe a little less than the wide receiver or the quarterback. I think they can put together a solid starting 5, but I have pretty big questions about the depth. Of course, there's even bigger questions on the other side of the ball. And we talked about this yesterday, and we talked about the defensive end situation last week. And we don't need to recap every single detail of the defensive line right now. But suffice to say, it's thin. There's 15 guys. 20% of them are transfers in Nate Matlack and Nick James and David Ojebwe. And again, we talked a lot about that yesterday, and we'll see what you get out of that group. But on the whole, Pitt's defensive line did not produce as much last year. And I think there are various reasons for that. Randy Bates and Pat Narduzzi pointed out that opponents were running the ball a lot more for a variety of reasons. One, because they were not concerned about Pitt's offense scoring, so teams could run the ball even if they didn't have much of a lead, or even if they were trailing, they could still keep the running game in their arsenal because they knew that Pitt was never going to really score enough to force them to have to pass. right? And I think when you're in that situation, I looked, it was a significantly higher percentage of Pitt's opponents' run plays. Let's say this in a better way that actually makes sense. Pitt's opponents last year ran the ball a significantly higher percentage of times, not counting sacks, than in previous seasons. So I think there is some truth to that. But at the same time, teams were willing to try to establish the run against Pitt because they had some success. A lot of that success was getting on the perimeter, and some of that is going to be tied to the outside linebacker play. But also, Pitt's defensive line just didn't get a great push. And I mean, if anything, if Devin Danielson, Tyler Bentley, and David Green were supposed to be good at anything, it was supposed to be, that they were big run stuffers. They could really, take up a lot of space and make it tough to run. Well, that didn't really happen all that much last year. And, sort of disappointingly so, given Pitt's history of being able to stop the run. And so those big questions still exist because that defense last year had those three super senior defensive tackles, plus DeAndre Jules, plus Dayon Hayes, plus Nate Temple, for whatever you want to say about him. And they still didn't produce all that much. Now, you've lost all of those guys. You've got a bunch of unproven guys. I mean, really, really unproven. Nate Matlack has played the most, but he doesn't have a whole lot of productivity on his resume. And then beyond that, you don't have much at all at defensive end or defensive tackle. It's a lot of unproven guys. And it sort of feels a little bit like last year when, going into the season, I said, look, my biggest concern with this team is that they're going to be counting on a lot of guys to do things they've never done before. And each one individually, you could say, yes, Bub Meads has never had this kind of season, or Dayon Hayes has never had that kind of season, or Phil Dracovic has never had this kind of season, and so on and so forth at a lot of positions. And you could talk yourself into it with each of those guys maybe individually. Be like, yeah, I could see Bub Meads totally breaking out. Yeah, I could see Donovan McMillan being really good. Yeah, I could see this. Yeah, I could see that. But the idea of all of them doing it in the same season was unlikely. And that's ultimately, that was one of the problems, that it didn't come together for all of those guys in the same season. And this year, when I look at the defensive line, I sort of have the same kind of feeling of like, I can talk myself into Nate Matlack individually, or Nick James individually, or Nakai Johnson individually. But convincing myself that all of them, and the list goes on beyond those three. I just picked those three. I could have included Sean Fitzsimmons and Elliot Donald and Bam Brema and Sincere Edwards and David Ojebwe and Jimmy Scott. I could run down a long list of guys who are going to be counted on to do things they have never done in their careers before. And I could talk myself into it with most of them individually. But all of them doing it all in the same year, that's a tougher sell. And that's a big, big question with the defensive line. And then, of course, there's a question at cornerback. For some reason, so for the longest time, it was sort of understood that, okay, defensive line, defensive back, Pitt has recruited really well. They're going to continue recruiting really well. They'll be fine there. It's the strongest positions on the team. And it was true for a long time. Now, we're starting to see some cracks in the last few years of defensive line recruiting. That's at least partially behind the current situation. And so those cracks have popped up a little bit, but I'm still maintaining the confidence in the cornerback recruiting. I think there are good players who have been recruited to play cornerback and defensive back in this defense over the past few years. I think a guy like Rylan Gandy is just waiting for his chance to break out. I think a guy like Rashad Battle is waiting for his chance to be healthy. I think Tamon Lynam didn't transfer in to be a reserve. I think he's going to be pushing for a starting job. I think they've got talented corners. We're seeing it at safety, right? Nothing has dropped off at safety. Yeah, Donovan McMillan's here as a transfer and playing at a really high level. He had a great season last year. But Javon McIntyre and P.J. O'Brien are both homegrown. Jesse Anderson and Cruz Brookins as well. And so it's still going at safety. We just need a little bit of further proof about the corners. And we'll see if we get that this year. But you know what the biggest question is? The biggest question facing Pitt this season, it's not the offense, it's not the quarterbacks, it's not the wide receivers, the defensive line, the corners, or any of those things. The biggest question facing Pitt this season, and it's May 9th. I'm probably going to say this at least weekly for the next 12 weeks. But the biggest question, the biggest thing that has to be answered and figured out this year is whether Pat Narduzzi can turn it around. Since the ACC championship game, Pitt is 12-14. Now, when you go 3-9, you're going to pile up the losses and not add many wins. They obviously went 9-4 the year before that. And so, that's 9-4 is a great season. 9-4 is a really good season. They finished the season ranked, all of that stuff. They had a great draft that next spring. I mean, you don't want to say 2022 was bad, but it was a step down from 2021, and certainly 2023 was a step down from 2022. When you look over the course of 2 seasons, 26 games since the ACC championship game in 2021, so that's the Peach Bowl in the next 2 seasons, they're 12-14. As much of a deal as we made about winning 20 games over 2 seasons, 2021 and 22, kind of going to make a big deal about only winning 12 over the last 2 years. I know we're overlapping 2022, but sometimes things will just fall off a cliff. This one feels like a bit of a descent over the last 2 seasons since that ACC championship game. And that puts a lot of importance on 2024 to turn things around. And I don't want to say that I think the program's spiraling or it's downhill but they haven't been trending in the right direction. I think most people would agree about that. They got to turn it around. And I think that's the biggest question facing the team and the program this season. Can they turn it around? And what that means, what that looks like, I don't know. 8 wins, 7 wins, 9 wins. Certainly not a losing record. And probably not a 500 record, but 7-5 would be an improvement, obviously. 4-win improvement. It's not going to make anybody, you're not going to build statues for 7-5, but at least it would be a step, maybe the first part of a turnaround. They need it. They need to turn things around. You can't have another losing season or else you're going to be in some real trouble. Real trouble. All right, we got our mailbag tomorrow. Don't forget about that. Like this video and subscribe to our YouTube channel, youtube.com/Panther-Lair.com, so that you never miss any of it. We got live stream here on Wednesday nights, 8 o'clock, 8:30. Move it back and forth. But if you're concerned that you're going to miss the start time, just click the subscribe button. You can turn on notifications, and you'll get an alert every time we go live. So do that, and then check out the website, Panther-Lair.com, Pittsburgh.rivals.com, the most comprehensive source of Pitt sports news on the internet. Football, basketball, and recruiting. Find it all at Panther-Lair.com and message boards to interact with hundreds and thousands of other Pitt fans. All day, every day, Pitt fans are hanging out at Panther-Lair.com, and we'd love for you to join us. Panther-Lair.com, Pittsburgh.rivals.com. Thanks so much for tuning in today. I hope you've had a great week so far. Hope your Thursday goes well, and we'll catch up with you tomorrow morning for the mailbag edition of the Morning Pitt right here on youtube.com/Panther-Lair.com.